Hello, and welcome to the Daily Faded. I am Hetz, and it's another day in the life, another day in the age of the coronavirus. This is the Daily Faded, where I get faded, where we get faded together, hopefully, and talk about some news and politics. So, I'm not going to talk much about Trump's press conference today because it was considerably less remarkable than yesterday. He backed off on his absolute power rant vis-a-vis the governors and said the governors are going to determine when to reopen their states. But then held some quasi threat over their heads that if they don't like the way they're doing it, then, well, they'll force them to do it a different way. Anyway, but the big news was that we're going to defund the World Health Organization. That was Trump's big selling point today at his campaign rally / press briefing. Doctors Fauci and Birx did not even speak at all. There was a long recitation of CEOs and companies that Trump is speaking to over the next week. That was also not particularly reassuring. But perhaps the worst thing to me was that he kept saying, it's getting better, it's going to be better, this optimistic Trump. Today was a bad day. The world passed 2 million confirmed cases and 130,000 total deceased today. And the United States went up 4.21% in cases to 613,886. But we went up 25.38% in deaths to 29,798. That's a big number. We were at 23,000 yesterday and we're at 26,000 today. That's crazy. New York saw a 44% increase in deaths to arrive at 14,827. And Massachusetts, 13% increase in deaths. Michigan, 10% increase in deaths. California, 6.97% increase in deaths, which is big for California. Our numbers have been much lower than that for the last week. And we had 40 die today in Los Angeles, which is the worst death toll, the worst single day death toll in LA. But Illinois up over 9%. These are deaths I'm talking about. Florida up over 14%. Louisiana up over 14%, past 1,000 now. Georgia up over 9%. Connecticut up over 11%. Maryland up over 15%. Indiana up over 10%. Colorado over 6%. Ohio over 18% increase today in the number of COVID-19 deaths. So for Trump to go out and give his rah-rah press conference and talk about what a great job he's doing is especially tone deaf on this day when we lost so many people to this fucking disease. We're about to hit 30,000. Trump likes to say that, well, the low estimate was 100,000 and we're going to come in much lower than that. 30,000 is not acceptable. It's just not acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. I only have, this might be a short show tonight. I don't know. I'm going to go in depth into what Gavin Newsom had to say today. Because unlike Trump, Gavin Newsom gives meaningful, substantive press conferences. Sorry. Gavin Newsom gives meaningful, substantial press conferences. And what they had to say today was really interesting. Really interesting. A couple of random asides. The Daily Fail today goes to Steny Hoyer, although I don't know that he said this today. I just heard it today. Steny Hoyer said, absent an emergency, the House is not coming back into session until May 4th. Absent an emergency? The number 2 person in House leadership among the Democratic Party thinks, absent an emergency, we'll go back on May 4th. I mean, when I just read those numbers, to think of all those people, all those families torn apart. Oh, God. But the great thing about the Republicans is that, yes, they usually outdo the Democrats for absurd. I got to wear nicer shirts than this. I look like a bum. But then again, I'm smoking weed and live streaming into YouTube. So I guess I am a bum. Governor Ron DeSantis made the bizarre decision to classify wrestling as an essential service. Live pro wrestling shows are an essential service. Quote, people have been starved for content. We're watching like reruns from the early 2000s. If Ron DeSantis is watching reruns of wrestling from the early 2000s, that's not a good sign for Florida. But then again, if Ron DeSantis is governor, that's not a good sign for Florida. So before I get into Gavin Newsom, I wanted to talk about a nationalgeographic.com article. This relates back to our Saturday night live stream where we were talking about people risking COVID-19 in the Amazon among the indigenous tribes. This is again from National Geographic. First coronavirus deaths reported in indigenous communities in the Amazon. So, of course, not that it was a genius prediction, but exactly as predicted. Quote, Brazilian officials and rights activists are warning of an impending public health calamity as reports emerge of the first deaths linked to the coronavirus among highly vulnerable indigenous populations across the Amazon region. Health workers in the northern state of Roraima reported on April 9th that a Yanomami adolescent had died of COVID-19, heightening concerns that he may have spread the disease to scores of friends and neighbors since developing symptoms 3 weeks ago. The youth had moved back and forth through an area rife with wildcat gold miners, and it's unknown where or from whom he contracted the sickness. In the north-central Amazon state of Para, post-mortem tests ordered by investigators confirmed that an 87-year-old Barari woman had died of COVID-19. Mourners turned out in droves for the woman's funeral in late March, unaware that she carried the deadly virus and could transmit the disease. The attendance of hundreds at the ceremony has stoked fears that many more cases will surface in the days ahead, potentially overwhelming already fragile healthcare systems in the region. Brazil's Federal Public Ministry, as the Office of the Federal Public Prosecutor is called, warned on April 8 of the risk of genocide amid allegations that FUNAI, the Brazilian institution we were talking about on Saturday, that FUNAI's Department of Isolated and Recently Contacted Indians. Sorry, the Federal Public Ministry also repeated its call for the immediate where was I? Amid allegations that FUNAI, Brazil's indigenous affairs agency, had done little to protect native communities from the coronavirus contagion. The Federal Public Ministry also repeated its call for the immediate removal of Ricardo Lopes Diaz, an evangelical missionary appointed in February to head FUNAI's Department of Isolated and Recently Contacted Indians. Diaz is a veteran pastor of the fundamentalist New Tribes Mission, the exact same organization we were talking about on Saturday. Founded in Los Angeles in 1942 with the goal of evangelizing isolated tribes in South America. We literally were just talking about the damage done by the New Tribes missionary. That was the one where the guy did child pornography with one of the indigenous girls. Gold miners are warring with protected tribes in some parts of the Amazon, killing as many as 5 in one community and cutting down trees with chainsaws within their land. Jair Bolsonaro has shown nothing but contempt for the rainforest, for Amazonia, for the indigenous people who live there. Nothing but contempt. And we can't ignore that this is a conquest. This is a look. It's entirely possible that this thing is so contagious that it ends up there one way or another. Entirely possible. That said, the Bolsonaro regime is responsible for this situation. And we have to keep in mind that it is a corrupt and illegitimate regime because Lula da Silva, who was polling in the 70s or 80s in popularity, was running for president. He had previously been president of the, I believe, left or Labor Party, and had done a ton to raise people out of poverty. Very successful president. And they came up with this car wash scandal, and they found him guilty of taking a bribe, supposedly an apartment that he was given as a bribe. I don't know. The whole thing was a scam. The judge in the case, Sergio Moro, is now the justice minister in Brazil, put there by Jair Bolsonaro. And Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept reported in The Intercept Brazil how Judge Moro was guiding the prosecution on how to prosecute the case to win the case. So he was heavily biased against Lula da Silva. And a Brazilian court actually struck down the decision, and Lula is free. He was freed a couple of months ago. So that corruption, led to Bolsonaro being the president of Brazil, and so the treatment of the indigenous tribes and the idea that someone from this missionary group would be the head of the isolated peoples group or whatever it was called is just I'm at a loss for words. In addition to this being a story about that political treachery, it's also about settler colonialism, because you have to remember that Brazil is a colonized nation. It was a colony of Portugal, and those remaining isolated tribes are, when we watch their destruction, we're watching the destruction of the Native Americans in North America at the time that it happened. It's exactly the same crime. So it's settler colonialism, obviously the authoritarianism of Bolsonaro. Um, and they're both exposing, Trump and Bolsonaro are both exposing their indigenous populations to dying from COVID-19. So that's just disgusting. So that was an unfortunate update after what we talked about on Saturday. All right. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about tonight, but it'll be a few minutes because there's a lot to it. Gavin Newsom's press conference today. When will the state reopen? If hospital and ICU numbers, this is from the LAist, but most of it is directly verbatim from Newsom. If hospital and ICU numbers flatten and start to decline over a few weeks, and if the required and infrastructure to help with contact tracing is built, it will be possible to lift stay-at-home orders, according to Newsom. Now, those are two very big ifs. We don't know how soon they're going to actually start to decline. Look at what happened today. And we don't have a contract tracing system in place. We just don't have that built out. We don't have the public health professionals to do contact tracing. So they laid out their 6 metrics for loosening stay-at-home orders. The state's framework for the next phase requires the ability to do 6 things, Newsom and California Department of Public Health Director Dr. Sonia Angel said. Angel laid out key questions for each of the indicators the state is looking at. Newsom noted that decisions around lifting stay-at-home orders will be guided by local leaders, but the state will provide baseline guidance. So, see if we can follow this here. 1, capacity to expand testing to address the tracing and tracking of individuals, including isolating and quarantining people, as well as supporting those who are positive or exposed. The effort will use technology and require more infrastructure, Newsom said. Key questions: how prepared is our state to test everyone who is symptomatic? Do we have the ability to identify contacts of those who are positive to reduce further transmission? There is no specific target number of tests they're looking at. California Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Mark Galley said, but they hope to be able to do tens of thousands of tests per day, and not just for those who are the sickest. It's also an important step, but one of 5 in the testing continuum, Galley said. Test, track, trace, isolate, and quarantine. So we got a ways to go to get the testing up to where it needs to be to lift the stay-at-home order. Two, protecting the most vulnerable from infection and spread. This is primarily senior citizens, as well as the homeless. Are older Californians and the medically vulnerable living in their own homes supported so they can continue appropriate physical distancing? So, do people have food? Can people survive? Will people have something to live on if they can't work and they're locked up in their home and they can't leave their home to go to Ralph's? Have we developed a plan to quickly identify and contain outbreaks in facilities housing older Californians, those living with disabilities, those currently incarcerated, and those with comorbidities? So, again, going into places like prisons, prisons and nursing homes, and looking for comorbidities and snuffing things out before they start to spread. 3, the ability of the hospital and health systems to handle surges. This is to meet needs as new strategies are adopted and stay-at-home orders are loosened, Newsom said. Excess capacity has come by postponing elective surgeries and other healthcare needs, Angel said, and we need to look at how to get back to providing that healthcare. Do we have adequate bed capacity, staff, and supplies, such as ventilators and masks? Obviously, at this point, we do not have enough, given that we don't know how big the surge might be. In San Francisco, in the Spanish flu of 1918, the second surge was bigger than the first surge after they relaxed restrictions. That was something that Garcetti went into incredible detail on, and it was fascinating. Can our healthcare system adequately address COVID-19 and other critical healthcare needs? 4, the ability to develop therapeutic drugs to meet the demand. This includes both Californian and national labs advancing research on the way to a vaccine. Newsom said that the hope is for a vaccine in approximately the next year. Have we built a coalition of private, public, and academic partners to accelerate the development of therapeutics? I have no problem with that. I don't mind working with the private sector as long as they're not ripping us off. That's the only problem with the private sector, is they're usually ripping us off. The airlines got $25 billion today. I'm not sure we should save the airlines. Have we identified potential therapeutics that have shown promise? There don't seem to be any therapeutics that show promise yet. And there was a hydroxychloroquine study where they canceled it because of the heart toxicity of hydroxychloroquine. I think it was giving people heart attacks or something like that. So all that hydroxychloroquine that the Trump administration bought may not have any use. This next one, 5, is a big one. The ability for businesses, schools, and child care facilities to allow for physical distancing. Newsom called this aspect redrawing floor plans, allowing people to stay 6 feet apart while inside these places. Even once orders are lifted, Newsom said to expect more teleworking and distance learning. Have we worked with businesses to support physical distancing practices and introduce guidelines to provide health checks when employees or the general public enter the premises? When this reopens, they are going to check your temperature when you walk into a restaurant. That's what it's going to be. Which is, it's in the public good, but is it a Fourth Amendment violation? I don't know. You have a right to privacy of your healthcare information, according to the Supreme Court, according to Roe v. Wade. Do we have supplies and equipment to keep the workforce and customers safe? Something I got to thinking about today is disinfectant. All the disinfectant runoff that this is going to cause. Disgusting. 6. The ability to determine when to reinstitute certain measures, such as the stay-at-home orders, if necessary. This is a big if. We're gonna be back here again. I that's what I think. I think there's going to be a second wave. Uh, I don't think it's going to start in California, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm sure there's going to be a second wave nationally. I'm sure of that because nothing about how Trump's talking about reopening the country makes sense. None of it. None of it. Um, Newsom said that we may need to go back and forth between stricter and looser interventions in the efforts to fight coronavirus, with more vigorous controls coming back. This may come as a response to data, and health concerns. Are we tracking the right data to provide us an early warning system? Do we have the ability to quickly communicate the need to reinstate these measures? There have been teams assembled in each of the 6 categories within the framework laid out, Newsom said, and discussions about them will be held with the public weekly. The future of gathering in public, including mass gatherings, things will likely look different when stay-at-home orders are lifted, Angel said, as this is a transition phase. Restaurants will likely reopen with fewer tables to allow for greater physical distancing. Newsom said that your waiter may be wearing a face mask and gloves, your menu may be disposable, half the tables may be gone, and your temperature may likely be checked on your way in. Let me ask you a question. Are you going to go to restaurants if that's the way it is, going to a restaurant? I don't think I would want to go to a restaurant, to tell you the truth. Maybe I'd start doing takeout because I'm not even doing takeout right now. Face coverings will likely be common in public. Angel noted that some areas have had stricter face covering orders already. New opportunities, she said, will likely arise to support mitigation. This includes efforts to improve contact tracing as well as isolating people as needed, Angel said. And here she was talking about the fact that there are going to be jobs generated in handling all of these things. Quote, the prospect of mass gatherings is negligible at best until we get to herd immunity and we get to a vaccine, Newsom said. Large-scale events bring in hundreds or thousands of people are not in the cards based upon our current guidelines and current expectations. So Coachella in October, goodbye. Sorry. However, he added things could change radically, such as therapeutics and testing at scale, as well as the capacity to get vaccines sooner than expected. Yeah, so if some of those things happen, then we could be hunky-dory a little bit sooner. But the reason I wanted to read this out and lay out these principles, I don't know if they've covered everything. I seem to remember from the press conference that there was also some attention paid to making sure the distribution of healthcare access is equal in the state, testing in particular, that wealthy areas don't have more testing opportunities than less wealthy areas. So there were some other good things that they covered. It was a long press conference. It was very good. But to contrast it with Donald Trump is a stunning, stunning contrast. It's so thoughtful, and it's taking, again, I don't know if it's taking everything into consideration, but it feels like it's taking everything into consideration. And I don't know what the answers to all of those questions are. I think they don't know yet what the answers to all of those questions are. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. They can't know everything. So that's so much more reassuring than listening to Trump every day. Because listening to Trump is just, it boggles the mind. It boggles the mind. All right, my friends, brothers and sisters, and non-gender conforming siblings, have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow night. Peace out. Stay well. Stay safe.